In this video, you are going to understand the real chain of events that led to one of the most controversial moments in Ghana's history, the execution of 3 former heads of state under Jerry John Rawlings. Not just what happened, but why it happened, what forces were at play, and what it meant for Ghana's future. On the morning of May 15, 1979, a young Air Force officer named Jerry John Rawlings launched a bold but poorly coordinated coup attempt against Ghana's military regime. Guess what? It failed. He was arrested within hours, beaten and put on trial for treason. But something unexpected happened. Instead of pleading for mercy, Rawlings used the courtroom as a platform. He openly criticized corruption within the military and political elite, framing the struggle not as soldiers versus civilians, but as ordinary people versus the privileged few. Contemporary reports and later historical accounts confirm that his statements resonated widely, especially among junior ranks and civilians frustrated by economic hardship. At the time, Ghana was facing severe crisis. Inflation had surged dramatically during the late 1970s and shortages of basic goods were widespread. Strikes and unrest had become frequent. While exact figures vary across sources, there is broad agreement among economic historians that living conditions had deteriorated significantly. Rawlings' speech transformed him from a failed coup plotter into a symbol of resistance. 3 weeks later, on June 4, 1979, junior officers and soldiers staged a successful uprising. They freed Rawlings from detention and installed him as the leader of a new ruling body, the Armed Forces Revolutionary Council, or AFRC. Now, this is where the story takes a darker turn. The AFRC declared what it called a house cleaning exercise. Its stated aim was to purge corruption and restore accountability within the military and political system. Special tribunals were set up to try former leaders and senior officers. Among those arrested were 3 former heads of states: General Ignatius Acheampong, General Frederick Akuffo, and General Akwasi Afrifa. They were accused of corruption, abuse of power, and contributing to Ghana's economic decline. It is important to be precise here. There is documented evidence that corruption existed within previous regimes and public dissatisfaction was real. However, the trials conducted by the AFRC have been widely debated by historians and legal scholars. Many argue they lack due process and some convictions remain controversial. On June 16 and June 26, 1979, these 3 leaders, along with several other senior officers, were executed by firing squad. For many Ghanaians at the time, these executions were seen as justice. Crowds reportedly supported the actions, believing that those responsible for the country's suffering were finally being held accountable. But others saw something very different. They saw a breakdown of legal norms, a dangerous precedent where power determined guilt and where justice was delivered without safeguards. Decades later, Rawlings himself acknowledged that not all those executed may have been equally culpable. In particular, he suggested that some individuals might have been caught in what he described as a broader moral and political struggle. So the question remains, why were they killed? The answer is not simple. It sits at the intersection of multiple forces. First, there was economic collapse. Ghana's crisis created widespread anger, and that anger needed an outlet. The executions served as a visible response for that frustration. Second, there was military discontent. Junior officers felt marginalized and believed senior leadership had betrayed both the armed forces and the country. Third, there was ideology. Rawlings and some of his allies were influenced by revolutionary ideas circulating at the time, ideas that emphasized radical accountability and the dismantling of entrenched power structures. And finally, there was momentum. Revolutions often move faster than institutions can control. Once Rawlings was propelled into power by the June 4 Uprising, expectations were immediate and intense. The demand for action, for justice, for change left little room for gradual reform. But here's the critical point. Why the executions were justified by the AFRC as necessary, historians remain divided on whether they achieved their intended purpose or simply deepened cycles of instability. After just 112 days in power, Rawlings handed over to a civilian government in September 1979. This suggests that, at least initially, his role was intended to be transitional. However, Ghana's challenge did not disappear. By By December 31st, 1981, Rawlings returned to power through another coup, citing continued corruption and ineffective governance. This time, his rule lasted much longer under the Provisional National Defense Council. During the 1980s, Ghana experienced both repression and reform. Human rights organizations documented cases of detention, restrictions on press freedom. At the same time, economic policies introduced during this period eventually contributed to stabilization and growth, according to institutions like the World Bank. This dual legacy makes Rawlings one of the most complex figures in African political history. To some, he was a revolutionary who confronted corruption head-on and helped rebuild a failing state. To others, he was a military ruler whose methods included execution, suppression, and fear. Both perspectives are supported by different strands of historical evidence, and that brings us to the deeper lesson of the story. Power, especially during times of crisis, often forces choices between speed and justice, between action and procedure. Today, Ghana is often cited as one of Africa's more stable democracies. Peaceful transitions of power and constitutional governance are now the norm, but that stability was shaped in part by moments like this. Moments of conflict, decision, and consequence. So when we look back at why those former leaders were executed, we are not just looking at one man's decision. We are looking at a system under pressure, a military divided, a population pushed to its limits, and a revolution that moved faster than its ability to self-correct. If you found this story insightful, there's a lot more to explore. On this channel, we break down real historical events, hidden stories, and the forces that shape nations and leaders. Watch my other documentaries to understand the deeper patterns behind history. Not just what happened, but why it happened. And if you want more stories like this, stories that challenge what you think you know, make sure you subscribe and stay connected. Because history is not just about the past, it's about understanding the present and seeing the future more clearly. Thank you.